Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harsh Mahajan, and I'm a radiologist practicing in New Delhi. And with me is Dr. Neeraj Jain, who's a pulmonologist and the head of the pulmonology department of Sir Gangaram Hospital in Delhi. And at the outset, I thank Meradoc for organizing this. And Dr. Khilnani, who was to actually start this interaction and this webinar, he's having some issue in joining. So in the interim, I would request Dr. Neeraj Jain, who has treated thousands of COVID patients in the last 15, 16 months. He's someone who's on the ground, both in the ICU, in the wards, as well as in the OPDs, to take us through what really happened since COVID came, the first wave, what is different about the second wave, and where do you see, where he sees it headed. And Dr. Jain, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Harsh. I think so much has happened over the last 15 months, ever since 16 months, when we started hearing about this virus and the havoc that it has caused. And for all of us who are dealing with this, patients, doctors, all healthcare workers, it was a totally new experience, an unaccustomed experience. None of us have faced a pandemic kind of situation of this magnitude ever. With a virus where we knew nothing about the virus, actually. And as things developed, as the world experience grew, we have learned. Now, if we look back, last year, when the virus first came, it started with what looked like a benign flu-like illness. And fortunately, most people recovered from this with a very mild disease, and less than 5% suffered very severe disease. Some lost their lives, some ended up in the ICU for prolonged periods, and a few of those were left with long-term debility in terms of lung damage or other organ damage. And we got to learn that normal, healthy people usually recovered. People with comorbidities or whose immune status was compromised, whether it was poorly controlled diabetics, people with congestive heart failure, kidney disease, liver disease, or cancer patients on chemotherapy, or people on immunotherapy for autoimmune conditions, those were the people who probably got the more severe disease. We, through the lockdown, with whatever treatment modalities we had, we tided over that period. We got a relatively easy period, in the latter half of last year. And then we were hit again, November, December, we had more cases. By then, we felt more confident with some of the medicines that we were using. Now, after January, we knew the world was talking about another wave. And when this one hit us, we have realized that this is not only more severe, it is very, very highly infectious and contagious. This particular strain of the virus that we are experiencing right now. And it has affected so many people that it overwhelmed our healthcare system completely. We saw Maharashtra going through it, and we were waiting to see what it would do, and then it hit the whole country in different parts. Now, what's different, very briefly, about this episode compared to last year? Like I said, it's very highly infectious. It's like an airborne disease, typically like an airborne disease. We always suspected that it was an airborne disease, but this year it has confirmed that this is spreading like an airborne disease. And a lot of young people have suffered very severe disease this year. So the age group of 40 to 60, a lot of people have suffered. Unfortunately, too many people have lost their lives, in my opinion. And you have to just talk to people that and almost everyone has lost someone who's near or dear in the family or friends. And this disease is also different in that it is causing a more prolonged illness. Last year, most people recovered in the 2 to 3 to 4 week period completely, and they were almost normal. Uh, this year, a lot of people, the onset of the severe disease is delayed, and then it gets prolonged. And some people who recover in 2 weeks, in the third week, they start getting a fever again when they've come off medication. These are again people who've had mild disease by definition. So this disease has been totally different. We have a lot more medicines that we've had experience with, but I'm not going to talk about that. I think Dr. Khilnani has joined us. So maybe I'll treat this as an introduction, Harsh, and we can get on with Dr. Khilnani
Yeah,
starting.
thank you very much, Neeraj, and welcome, Dr. Khilnani. Sudhir is having some problems. His computer has crashed at the ON Moke Vardat pe. So, welcome. And to introduce Dr. Khilnani, who actually is a well-known figure nationally and internationally in physician circles amongst pulmonologists. And he's also a very revered figure on national television. Dr. Khilnani was till about a year and a half ago the head of chest medicine, pulmonology at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi, and then took voluntary retirement and is now the head of pulmonology at PSRI Hospital in New Delhi. He's been also treating COVID both in the ICU, in the wards, as well as on OPD basis since the last 16 months, and has a wealth of experience. And Dr. Khilnani, could I request you to actually project your slides and take us through what is happening right now? And then we will open it up for questions and answers later. We are already starting to get questions. So, Dr. Khilnani, please.
So thank you, Harsh. Thank you, Meradoc, for inviting me and making me meet my friend Neeraj. We haven't met for ages. Amazing friend. And of course, Harsh, an amazing friend and associate. And I think this COVID has brought us closer as far as Harsh is concerned. But it has taken so many lives. So many of us have lost their nears and dears. Scare is there. We are scared. After the first wave, we were in comfort zone that okay, especially for Delhiites, it was sort of gone. We were moving out, people were traveling here and there. The second wave has come, it has put a scare for our life for the third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave. Who knows? So I'm not going to talk about everything about COVID in 15 minutes. It's not possible to cover. But if you look at it, what is happening, these are few statistics from 26th May. The total deaths in US is plateauing, whereas we have gone like this. And we are going to discuss why. Why India has gone like this while US, both democratic countries, India is boasting to be a superpower. So what are the causes of recent surge of COVID in India? Is it COVID fatigue with the poor infection control practices? Is it the susceptible population? We haven't attained any kind of herd immunity. Zero survey has shown 10 to 20%. Is it the change of season? Or it is incomplete vaccination program? Or it is the mutation which is leading to enhanced contagiousness and due to airborne transmission, which Neeraj just mentioned. So I'll take one by one, and I promise you that I won't exceed my time. So let us understand the mutations. How are the variants are formed? Viruses, especially RNA viruses, are notorious for mutations. Now, this is a Wuhan virus, and there are mutations. That means there's a change in the RNA. Now, these mutations keep happening every second, every minute, but some of the mutation changes in the RNA will form a virus which will have a behavior which has a potential to cause disease, and it has a different character. That is where we call it a new strain. So what is this new strain is doing and why it is important? Because their contagiousness and severity of illness may be different, as we are seeing this time. A person infected with COVID may not be immune to the next mutant which is coming, and that is very scary for people who are vaccinated and those who are got infection. So therefore, why they are dangerous? They seem to be spreading fast. The UK strain, we know that. Their antibodies generated through vaccination, currently we believe that they are good for against mutant also, but future we don't know. An increase in the number of cases will put more strain on the healthcare system. And this is a journal, in the New England Journal of Medicine, it came that British SARS-CoV variant of concern B.1.1.7 reveals its lethality. Initially, we thought that it was more contagious by 50%, but now we know it is more lethal also. So if you talk about Indian scenario, the B.1.36 variant was found in Bangalore. And what is important today is B.1.1.7 variant, which was earlier detected in UK and is dominant in Punjab to the tune of 81%. And today only in JAMA, one report has come which I couldn't make into the slide. Then in Canada, they have found this strain. And they are thinking that this will be more common than the Wuhan strain. So various strains are coming, and there are variants of high consequence. And what could be the consequence? Dr. Mahajan's lab may not be able to detect it because it has changed its character. So far, it has not happened. It may be more severe or clinical disease. It may not respond to the treatment as well as Dr. Neeraj was talking. And it may lead to reduced effectiveness. So therefore, the mutations are causing havoc. B.1.1.7 strain is causing havoc all over the world. That's why the flights have been stopped. And I don't think Indian people from India will be allowed to go to various countries because of this fear. Now I'm going to talk about vaccine and COVID immunity. How does vaccine works? The vaccine works by, now this is the inactivated virus you inject into the person, like Covaxin virus, which is a killed virus. You inject into the human body. There are T cells. You form the army of antibodies. Now these antibodies are formed. This could be a killed virus. This could be a vector, the coexisting virus. This could be a mRNA. It could be a DNA. But ultimately, what you are looking at is memory cells, and you are looking at the antibodies. So how the effects of vaccination? I'm not going to the technical part of it. Now, if there is a no mass vaccination, as you see in this cartoon, this is the red one is the person who is suffering from the disease, and he'll be able to infect one after the other, and so many people will be infected. However, after the vaccination, these grave one people are the one who are vaccinated, and therefore they are immune to the COVID infection. So somewhere the transmission would stop. So therefore, when you vaccinate people and we talk about herd immunity, when 60 to 70% of people in the population are come into the gray area, somewhere the transmission will stop. And that's why you see in United States, the masks have been removed. People have been allowed to go out. People have been allowed to mix up. What is the strength? The strength is vaccination. Let's not go to the stage where India is infected and we lose so many lives to get this immunity. Let's vaccinate them. Now, Shadox 1, that is Astra vaccine, which has an efficacy of, say, something like 60 to 90%. It has been shown that it has an advantage that the protection from the severe disease is close to 100%. So anybody who has any hesitancy in vaccinating himself, क्या फायदा? 70% to 61% to efficacy है, या 70% efficacy, but actually, who is bothered about mild viral illness? We are bothered about severe illness, getting into the ICU, losing our lives. On that accord, the vaccination gives close to 100% immunity. So Covishield has 61 to 90% Covaxin, 81% Sputnik, which has come into the India 90%. Pfizer and Moderna are 95%, and Johnson is also coming, which will be 90 to 91%. The question is, have mutant strains evaded efficacy of vaccine? That question comes to our mind. Wuhan strain, yes, not. It is still effective. UK strain is still effective. But Brazil strain, the extra vaccine does not work. So Brazil have returned all the vaccines which were given to them. So therefore, the future requires our basic scientists to keep on working. The mRNA Pfizer and Moderna has a capacity to be altered because they are genetically engineered vaccines, and their scientists have claimed that they can alter the vaccine structure in a matter of days for it to be effective against the mutant strain. The good news from India is that extra vaccine, which is 90% of us have got Covishield vaccine, it is active against B117 variant of SARS-CoV-2 virus. Coming to what we have learned all this time, what do we know and what should we do? So many, all pictures showing I don't know. And that's what it is. Initially we thought that 2 गज की दूरी बहुत जरूरी, बहुत सारे नारे लगे, and people thought if you maintain a distance of 1 meter or 2 meters you are safe, this person is safe. And we were actually disinfecting our mobile phones, wristwatch, and thinking that fomites are very big source of transmission. And we kept saying that on plastic it may remain for 5 days, aluminum for 2 to 8 hours, copper for 4 hours. But over a period we realized it is the airborne transmission which Neeraj mentioned is the most important. This is a beautiful cartoon which shows that if the A is infected and B is close to him, he will be transmitting the droplets. The C will be free. But this was not true. If the A, speaks loudly or shouts or screams or laughs, he'll be throwing virus into this environment, and ultimately C will not be protected. What is the implication? If I'm sitting in my office, which is an air conditioned office, somebody comes and he is not wearing his mask properly, and it is known that 60% of transmission is by asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. To make the things worse, even before the person becomes symptomatic, 2.6 days before, that is pre-symptomatic stage, person start transmitting the disease. So therefore, if I'm sitting in my office and somebody comes and leaves virus in my room, and when he goes off, I say, oh my God, I pull down my mask and start working. The virus is going to be there for 3 to 16 hours. And this is not my thinking, this is scientific fact. If you go to the public washroom, if somebody has gone before you and he has pulled down the mask and have thrown virus into the washroom, it's going to be there for that length of time. So therefore, the airborne transmission is a reality which WHO said as early in the middle of 2020. And what it makes a difference? It makes a difference that it is advised that you remain in a well-ventilated room. Keep your air exchanges, which is very difficult to do. But my advice would be that whenever you are in your own environment, you might be alone. Do not pull down your mask. We all use our mask in our hospital, N95 mask, double mask. I climbed 2 flights of stairs, I become severely breathless. And as soon as I finish my procedure of bronchoscopy, I want to pull down the mask and breathe normally. But I have to refrain from that because I am in a hospital environment. I know that it is possible to transmit disease by airborne transmission. So is it not over yet? Is it over yet, or we are through it? Is it the new era of concern after COVID? And I'll just take only 2 minutes. Because unless we talk about black fungus, which has been talked about, my talk will not be complete. So the mucormycosis is known as black fungus, but it's actually not black. It is black. It is called black because it's a catchy term, and people get the skin black. Eye becomes black. The nose has sometimes blackish color. So it's not. But it is a ubiquitous organism which is present all over. If you have a bread which is got still, it might have mucormycosis. It may be in there, but it occurs mostly in the immunocompromised patients, in an uncontrolled diabetes mellitus or hematological malignancy or transplant patient or person receiving chemotherapy. As of now, Maharashtra is leading maximum cases, then Gujarat and Haryana and Delhi. So is the mortality. The mortality is very high unless detected early and treated. Everybody is scared of this disease. And previously, and Neeraj would agree with me that we see few cases in a year, maybe one case in 2 months of mucormycosis. And today we are saying in Jaipur, I have the information that 75 cases are admitted in SMS Medical College. Why it has come? It has come because the denominator is big. So many people have received steroids indiscriminately. So many people have uncontrolled sugar, which is actually goes to 400 and 500. And uncontrolled diabetes is the single most factor for development of. A lot of things have been blamed. Oxygen cylinders, or the oxygen which is used for industries, dirty mask, poor hygiene. But the fact of the matter is, it is the people who have uncontrolled diabetes on steroids, immunocompromised, prolonged ICU stay, trauma, burns, and so on and so forth. Although most doctors feel that it was triggered by unregulated use of medicine in the COVID patient, but the fact of the matter is that we do not know whether COVID itself kills T cell immunity. That needs to be investigated. It's very easy to blame people that they are not taking their drugs properly. Doctors are blaming, but there are so many things which are not known about it. Therefore, of course, you not to know ought to know that there's a unilateral headache, or there is a blackish or bloody discharge from the ear, and sorry, nose, or nasal blockage, or double vision, or blurring of vision. These are all, or toothache or loosening of teeth. These are, and this is actually creating a scare. People phoning in the evening. मेरे को सिर में दर्द हो रहा है, मेरे को black fungus हो गया. But be sure, if you have a mild disease, you have never received steroids, if you are not immunocompromised, if you are having headache, it's not black fungus. You don't need to be investigated. Of course, diagnosis, I won't go into this histology and investigation. Blood tests are available for PCR. It can affect lung also, and treatment is by antifungal drugs, amphotericin B. Everybody knows that amphotericin B, posaconazole, and other drugs could be effective, but sheet anchor remains amphotericin B. The future is this. We need to have COVID appropriate there. The India, we have no choice. We are much behind United States. And evidence is that in United States, when they mandated masks in 15 states, they've prevented 2 lakhs. When they restricted the in-house dining, the mortality went down. So these are the evidences that we should use. Last slide. Important things that we don't know, we can discuss during question and answer hours. How long does the immunity last after COVID infection? Frequently asked question. Should patient with infection be vaccinated at all? If yes, after how much time? In future, should vaccine be repeated after 6 months to 1 year? People who should not be vaccinated, what is the difference between oxygen cylinder and concentrator? This is not a topic of the day. Of course, plasma therapy has been given. Can vaccinated person without being COVID positive be a plasma donor? So these are the questions that we can discuss. Once again, I thank Harsh, Neeraj, and the organization, Meradoc, which has invited me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kilnani, for that comprehensive, quick, and coverage of the topic, and in very easy terms. you didn't use medical jargon and all that, made it easy for everyone. Mr. Mathur has joined. So Sudhir, kindly take over.
Thank you. Thanks. Firstly, my apologies for a technical glitch at my end. But thanks a lot to Dr. Khilnani, Dr. Jain, and Dr. Mahajan for joining us. I'm Sudhir from Meradoc. There is a whole host of questions. This was actually intended to be a corporate, sort of an interaction, corporate initiative of Symphony and Terraricon with Meradoc. However, given the gravity of the situation, both our expert panels and the company felt we may as well, open this out to the public. So it's on YouTube. So thanks a lot for that. Gayatri, a few words from you as to what do your employees feel and what was the need for this. And I know you have 200 incidents of, COVID directly or indirectly in the system, but a few words from you would be very helpful. And then I'll just jump straight into the questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Sudhir. Actually, such an honor to have, the esteemed panelists amidst us to really take our employees and their families through really understanding this pandemic that we have today. I think most of us on the call, at least the employees and their families, really sought out to find the answers on Google or anybody that we knew closely to give us solutions, right? But putting together a panelist like this to whom we can actually ask some very pertinent questions and get the right answers was very important for us. We've had across the Symphony AI group, we've had more than 200 people that were impacted directly or indirectly. Indirectly, I mean some of their family members were impacted by COVID. And so, this gave rise to plethora of questions with respect to, I have the symptom, what can I do? How can I save myself from COVID? Right to, I've recovered. So what are some of the things that I must really do, as a post-COVID, treatment kind of thing. So I look forward to really the question and answer session that will actually help, answer a lot of questions that really have come from the employees. So once again, thanks for this opportunity, Sudhir, and thank all the panelists on the call today to help us.
Thank you, Gayatri. I'm trying to bunch questions so that it makes life easy, but the first one that I have, it involves two human beings at the same time. So let me go with that first. This is more for you, Dr. Mahajan. Vaccination during pregnancy. Should one go for it or not?
See, currently the recommendation is not there for vaccination during pregnancy. There is a lot of talk that it should be permitted, but the current recommendations don't, at least in our country, do not permit it. And till such time that data is not available, probably it would be best to avoid it. Because the kind of vaccines that we have, one has to do a vaccine specific trial and only then be able to say. I do know that FOXI and some of the gynae associations had actually in the middle said that you can go ahead and get it done. And gynecologists and obstetricians had actually started recommending it also, but then they have withdrawn that. So this is what it is at the present point of time. And the best is the mask. If you're wearing a proper mask properly, nothing will go beyond it. Nothing will go through it.
Just a follow up on that one. While nursing,
that I think has been permitted. That has been permitted. Yes. In fact, it is said that the child also may get some antibodies as a consequence of that. Yes.
That's good. Okay. This is a very general one. We talked about masks, and there were a lot of questions on masks in terms of prevention. But what kind of masks do you recommend? And there is all this new thing that people are talking about 2 masks at the same time. What's the quality? And all of a sudden, the hand washing thing seems to have died down. So that's another question. I'm just clubbing it into one.
Neeraj, you want to take that? You're muted.
So basically, the issue about masks has been discussed almost threadbare whenever we talk about it. I still think we should be very clear for people who are working in healthcare settings in any capacity should be using an N95 mask when they are there in the hospital. And on top of the N95, you have a disposable surgical mask, which is the one that you keep on all the time. And when you finish your work, you can throw away the surgical mask. And the N95, if it has not been directly contaminated, can be removed, kept in a paper bag for a period separately, and it can be reused up to 3 to 5 times. This is something that is standard practice nowadays. But this came into being when masks were very expensive. Now we can afford to actually change our mask every time. So you can actually dispose of all the masks that you used in a hospital setting and use a new mask every time. For people who are not in healthcare, in public, in normal public places, double masking is still a very good thing if you're outside your own home. So a double mask means you can use a 3-layered cloth mask as the first mask. Again, the mask that you use next to your face, to your skin, should be so well applied that there should be no gap from the nose here down to your face and your chin, and the mask should be a complete seal with your face. And then on top of that, you can use a surgical mask. Again, the advantage of that is that you increase the protection level that you have got against inhaling aerosols. A single mask will also reduce the risk of you transmitting infection or getting infection, but a double mask obviously is better. You cannot exercise. Dr. Khilnani mentioned just now that if you climb up, I know that with our N95 mask, if I was able to climb up 5 floors of stairs without a mask, now 3 floors, I get short of breath. So don't exercise with masks. When you're out in the public domain, you cannot exercise with masks. You can walk with a cloth mask or a surgical mask, but you can't do any vigorous exercise. It can actually put a strain on your system, and people who may have borderline lung or heart conditions should not exercise with a mask. But a double mask, where the first mask is closely applied to your skin, when you wear a mask, please do not keep touching your mask. Do not keep pulling it down to eat or drink or to talk to people. Leave the mask on, don't touch it. When you come home, remove the mask, sanitize your hands, put the mask away separately, so that any contaminant that might have been on the mask is discarded and you've sanitized your hands, because you don't know what all has come into contact with the mask. So if you can follow this much, then it's all right. Hand sanitization is a good thing in principle. I mean, I agree, nobody talks about it right now because now we are talking about airborne diseases. But hand sanitization is just as important, because you could have touched a surface where somebody has coughed, and you could easily infect yourself also through your mask. So please always remember, hand sanitization is still as important.
Thank you very much for that, because all of a sudden that seems to have disappeared. This thing. Okay. The other thing that concerns all of us, again, back to our children, and this is for everybody, how about, vaccinations for between 12 and 18? We are not getting into its availability, but just as a, more fundamental issue for, question for everybody.
I think, yeah. Go ahead, Harsh. You can.
See, Canada and the US have actually, done the trials, and now 12 to 15-year-olds also are being vaccinated. And even though children are not, miniature adults, and the system is different, and that's why you have to do these trials first to know whether there is something unusual, untoward that may happen, and only after that open up the vaccination for children. And I'm sure it'll go down below this. 2+ also will ultimately be vaccinated, because they need to be protected as well. But fact of the matter is that till such time these trials have not been done, because see, the basic principle or philosophy behind any medication, be it a vaccine, be it a drug, is first and foremost to do no harm. So that is what the phase 1 and phase 2 trials, when they are done, they actually determine whether the side effects, and there will be some kind of side effects of vaccines. We are all aware of that. Children have been getting the shots, they get a fever, whether it's a flu vaccine or some other vaccine. As long as there's no major side effect, and this is a self-limiting side effect, there's no problem. But till you prove that for a new vaccine, you cannot actually vaccinate children. And they've done those trials for some specific vaccines in Canada and in the US, and 12 plus children are being vaccinated. I'm sure here also already, I think Bharat Biotech has said that they will be recruiting for a trial in children shortly, even as we speak. And I'm sure once those trials are done, the safety followed by efficacy, once they are good, children also will get it. And but this overarching fear, that the next wave is going to be in children because they are not vaccinated, I think that's a little over exaggerated thing. Of course, when they go to school and interact with each other, that's where the chance of getting infected, because especially children under 8, 9 years, you can't expect them to be wearing masks. Maybe 12 plus, they may still be able to follow COVID appropriate behavior. Below that, it's pretty unlikely. And so that's where the family should be fully vaccinated. If all other members of the family are vaccinated, then at least the family members will not give it to children who are unvaccinated. And in schools also, I'm sure they will find, we had rapid antigen tests, which can be done and can be repeated. The report comes in a few minutes. That is how they are opening up schools in the West. In England, they tried opening up too early, and they had to shut down again when there was increased numbers of infections in children. And children, if infected, can carry it home. But if you're vaccinated, then your chance of getting a serious illness or being hospitalized, as Dr. Khilnani told, becomes nearly zero. It is 0.0 some percent. That's how useful these vaccines are for preventing hospitalization and serious illness. Of course, you can still get infection if you don't follow COVID appropriate behavior, even after being vaccinated. It is said that your chance may reduce, but the reduction is not to zero. So you still have to continue to wear the mask and follow COVID appropriate behavior. If you do get infected, as we've seen, healthcare workers are most at risk. And we've seen that hardly a few healthcare workers after full vaccination have had serious disease. And the exceptions have gone on to prove the rule that so children will ultimately get vaccinated. But if all adults in the family are vaccinated, then the chance of your child being safe becomes that much better.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. So, there are two kinds of questions coming up. One are very, very specific, and, we will reach out to the individual asking some very, very specific questions and stick to ones which would be in the larger majority of the people here. So, Dr. Khilnani has one which is specifically for you. How does one differentiate between common flu and COVID? And the symptoms seem to be similar when you hear. And what is it that one should do? So if you go for a test, what kind of a test should it be? If it comes out to be negative, then what do I do?
So first lesson that I express my competence at differentiating common flu from COVID infection, because the symptoms are same. Symptoms of running nose, fever, body ache, sore throat are same. But COVID has certain things which are more peculiar. The body ache is generally more severe. Diarrhea has been seen more commonly, especially with this second wave. And headache is equally common between the two. I would say the flu has more of running nose as compared to, but that could be, fictitious. But while I'll spend more time on the diagnosis. The diagnosis of COVID infection is extremely important, and I didn't put those slides because that was not. RT-PCR remains the gold standard for diagnosis of COVID infection. Gold standard, it does not mean that it picks up 100%. So RT-PCR should be done in all the patients, especially now. Who should undergo an RT-PCR? If we talk about when we were in second wave, I hope it's going 15 days back. If I talk about anybody who is having fever, anybody who's having sore throat, anybody who's having severe body ache, anybody who's losing taste, anybody who's having diarrhea, anybody who has been in contact with another person must go an RT-PCR test. But this will not be true when actually the positivity rate goes down to 0.5% or 1% in the community. So this would vary from place to place. Now, ICMR has approved rapid antigen test for for diagnosis of COVID, and I'm a little critical about it, so I would air my views. The rapid antigen test at best has a sensitivity of 50%. That means that if the 100 people have COVID infection, 50 will be positive and 50 will, and that could be a big disadvantage because those who test negative will go into the community saying, "Bhai, main to negative hu." And he may not restrict his movement. So what I'm saying that why I'm telling the sensitive and specificity. And third thing I want to say that if the rapid antigen test is positive, there is no need to go for our confirmation for RT-PCR because specificity of rapid antigen test is as good as RT-PCR. So the next question is who should go for a repeat test? Somebody who has got who is in a high containment zone like we are in Delhi now, somebody who has got a contact with the COVID patient, somebody who has got a family member who has got COVID, somebody who continues to have fever, sore throat, cough, and may with or without shortness of breath. If he is tested once negative, if he continues to be symptomatic, he should go for the repeat test. 2 negative tests, RT-PCR, are considered as true negative. 1 negative is not considered negative, especially in the setting of high positivity rate in the community. And there's a role of CT scan. I'll give it to Harsh to talk about it because it is not my domain. But CT scan has proven to be a lifesaver for us as far as the diagnosis is concerned. Antibody test is not to be used for diagnosis of COVID. Antibody test is only used when you are thinking of plasma therapy. The rarest cases, we are unable to get positivity because antibody test will be positive only after 14 days when the IgG antibodies would be formed. Besides that, there are TrueNet tests, other tests which I'm not going to talk about, and very rarely in a given case, when the person is actually, we think heart of heart that he is having COVID, then we depend upon the inflammatory marker in the CT scan. And I would request Harsh to talk about value of CT scan in the diagnosis of COVID.
Thank you. I'll just take a minute. CT, I feel, has been abused and overused during the second wave, especially, and in some parts of the country, even in the first wave. But it is very important, very useful when done in the right context, for the right reason, as Dr. Gilnani has said. And one of those reasons may be that a person clinically has all the symptoms, signs of COVID, and we have had 2 negative RT-PCR results. And, till now, even for admission in a hospital, in a COVID hospital, you needed a positive RT-PCR report. And that's where the CT scan can be helpful, because on a CT scan, we find typical lesions of COVID and typical distribution. And since this is TerraRecon, you know what the CT software is and how it works. And using very ultra low dose CT scan, we can actually, in this clinical setting, give a diagnosis. So this is the one clinical setting where CT can be used for diagnosis. Otherwise, CT is to be used when the oxygen saturation falls below 94. Then you want to know what is the degree of involvement of the lung, the percentage volume involvement of the lung, where again CT is very important, very useful in differentiating mild, moderate, and severe lung involvement. And it is very important for decision making, whether to admit a patient in hospital. Of course, CT is not the only thing. You take into view blood tests, the inflammatory markers, the clinical condition of the patient, the oxygen saturation, all of these are taken into consideration. But CT is very valuable at this point of time. We can even predict based on the CT whether this patient will require ultimately intubation and ventilatory support. And so CT is very useful when done in the proper context, but should not. I mean, we had patients just walking in, मेरा RT-PCR positive है, मेरा CT कर दीजिए. Family is coming, and we had to send them back because even if the radiation dose is very, very low, yet I don't believe in doing unnecessary CT scans. And if you do a CT very early in the disease, you may be lulled into a false sense of security because it's very little involvement, and you say all is fine, and you may become complacent. So CT, even if it is to be done, the earliest is 5th to 6th day, and basically when the oxygen level falls.
Dr. Mayan, thanks a lot. We've been, WhatsApp, other social, tools have been very, very good. But I think all of us have got educated, fortunately or unfortunately. But, we all use oxygen meters. So one of the questions is, what is really the right, at a level that should concern me, to consult a doctor when the oxygen level falls below what? Or a degree of temperature goes above what?
Neeraj?
So basically the pulse oximeter, the first thing is it's a piece of equipment which has to be standardized, which has to be of a good quality. As with anything else that we use, if you have a substandard pulse oximeter, or if you don't use it properly, you are more likely to create more false alarms. So I'm assuming that whoever's using it is using a good quality pulse oximeter. And the way to use it is very important because that is the most of the job done. So you rest the hand of the patient, or the patient rests the hand on a surface in a relaxed fashion. You put the pulse oximeter in any of these three fingers, apply it well, leave it there for 10-15 seconds. Don't keep looking at it. Don't have your hand in a position where the circulation is, you're leaning on one side, your blood circulation is not good, the pulse oximeter is not getting a good pulse sensation. You will get false readings. After 10 seconds, whatever the reading, stable reading is with a good waveform on the pulse oximeter, you've seen, all of us have seen pulse oximeters now. That is your pulse oximeter reading. That is your oxygen saturation. For people who do not have lung disease or heart disease, who are otherwise healthy, their normal oxygen saturation would be 96 to 98% most of the time. In the context of COVID, if you are worried about whether the COVID is affecting your lungs, or you need an early warning, whether you're someone who's going to go in for severe disease, you do what we call a 6-minute walk test inside your isolated area. So you walk at your own pace. You do not have a targeted brisk walk. You walk at your own pace for 6 minutes, sit down for 10 seconds, put the pulse oximeter on, and see what your oxygen saturation is. If that is falling below 94% after walking for 6 minutes, you should get in touch with your physician. And you may need further investigation, like Harsh said, maybe a CT scan at that point. Now, that is the stage where one would do a CT scan in a patient to see what is the grading on the CT scan of the disease, and then put 2 and 2 together and say, okay, this patient needs escalation of treatment, right? For people who have chronic asthma, chronic bronchitis, or chronic lung disease, whose normal saturation is only 92% at home, let's say, who are on treatment for lung disease, they have to be a little more careful. For them, any drop from their normal saturation is important even at rest. So a person who's got chronic bronchitis normally says, okay, my saturation, before COVID had been 92% in any case. If that person's saturation falls below 90%, that is significant for that person. Even a 2% drop at rest is significant for that person. So people who are healthy, follow the 6-minute walk test. People who have lung disease, please rely on your physician to tell you what is acceptable. Do not make that decision yourself. Let your physician know what your saturation is, and let your physician decide what action to take, and how to react to it. But adding a point to Harsh's, I think it is very important what Harsh said. Do not do a CT scan too early unless you start with severe disease. Unless your symptoms are such that on day one your oxygen saturation is falling, on day one you're very ill, then that is the time to do the CT, or you wait. And most people, 99% of patients with mild disease should not get a CT scan done at all at any stage. People who are recovering without specific treatment at home. As far as the fever is concerned, a fever is a very individual response. Some people react very badly to even 100-degree Fahrenheit fever. Some people will tolerate 102-degree Fahrenheit fever. If your fever is not coming down with the dose of paracetamol that has been prescribed to you, and here again, please stick only to paracetamol for your fever. Other medicines do have side effects on the liver and kidney. Do not overuse other fever medicines on your own. Again, take the advice of your physician. You can use paracetamol up to every 6 hours in the appropriate dose. If your fever is not coming down with the paracetamol, then get in touch and get your other tests done to see why is your fever so severe. Are you going in for very severe inflammation where you do your inflammatory markers, or you do a CT scan to try and understand what else you can do or what else you can add to your treatment to bring the fever down.
No, thank you.
Sudhir, there's one question I'm seeing, a chance of pets getting the infection. Maybe Dr. Khilnani can take that, and also, long-term dangerous side effects that may be there, long-term effects of COVID-19, which have come into their own. So, Dr. Khilnani, could you take those two, please?
So I'll take in reverse order, because Neeraj, amazing exposition you give. I just want to give a warning feature. These days we have talked about proning at home when the oxygen was in shortage, and we went on television and advisory went that you prone the person with pillows and on, and oxygenation goes up, which is a fact. But it also gives a false sense of security. Proning and improving the oxygenation is not alternative to hospitalization or seeking urgent medical care. I just wanted to add that to what Neeraj has explicitly said. So I will talk about long-term side effects of COVID before going to the pets, because that has a very simple answer. This time, as Neeraj very beautifully said, that this time we are seeing a different kind of clinical profile. There was a study done in Italy in 2020 when they phoned up people after the COVID and asked them how are they feeling, and they asked various questions. Only 16% people said that they are feeling completely all right. 84% people have some or the other symptoms. Now, there are two types of sequelae of COVID, which are, one are structural in terms of disease, which requires intervention. Some may not require that kind of intervention. So first I will talk about the commonest symptom. The commonest symptom after the COVID is fatigue. Now, fatigue is a very non-specific thing. We physicians have a very silly habit of discounting symptoms which they think they cannot explain, or they cannot alter, or they cannot have sufficient medicine for it. Now, the fatigue is something that what I have experienced, people feel that by evening they feel like lying down, they don't feel like doing anything. Their actually interest in the activities they normally do is lost, and it comes all of a sudden. Suddenly they are in the office, suddenly they feel totally listless and they just don't want to do anything. So fatigue can continue for very long time. It can continue for months together. If we take SARS-1 experience, 40% of the people with SARS-1 had fatigue 3 years after their SARS. This is a study which was published. Now, other symptoms is feeling of feverishness. People say मेरे को 3 हफ्ते हो गए, 3 weeks हो गए और आपने कहा था कि आपने कोरोना को हरा दिया, आप तो ठीक हो गए, लेकिन मुझे तो बुखार लगता है. When they see in the thermometer, the temperature comes 99.2, 99. Now people say that 98.4 is the cutoff because thermometer में वो arrow लगा हुआ होता है. But actually, as per our books, we say fever when it is more than 99.6. So unless there is temperature which is persistently above 99.5 or 99.6, it is not considered to be fever. And this is a very common symptom of the post-COVID. The third symptom is sleep disturbances, which are extremely common. People not able to go to sleep. People get up in the middle of the night number of times. They keep perspiring and they keep getting up, and sometimes they require help also in the form of sleeping pills. Besides this, emotional disturbances are extremely common. People suddenly get agitated, they get depressed, they get their behavior changes, cognitive dysfunctions are there. One of the very senior person who is in politics, he says, I forgot that people are waiting for me and I just walked out. And this happened after COVID. So many cognitive dysfunctions are there. Besides this, headache, some diminution in appetite could be there. The bowel habits get completely altered. And I think we physicians are to be blamed because quite often, as the patient gets COVID, he consults first physician who says take ivermectin and azithromycin 2 days later, because these drugs do nothing to the COVID. They have no proven benefit. They don't cure the COVID. He goes to another physician, he gives doxycycline. Third physician also adds favipiravir. The patient is flooded with drugs. And this actually kills the flora of the intestine. And this I strongly feel has a lot of impact on post-COVID bowel habits and bowel movements. So these are the symptoms, few symptoms which I have narrated. There could be many. Having lightheadedness, difficult to concentrate. These are the common symptoms which occur, which are of no consequence because over a period of time, they will go away. But there are certain things which have consequence. And as a pulmonologist, the lung, COVID is basically pneumonia. So those people who have had moderate or severe pneumonia, there's a potential for them developing pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary fibrosis is scarring. जो हमें चोट लगती है, थोड़ा सा scar हो जाता है. One of the symptoms that I forgot to mention was cough after COVID pneumonia. That is because of the bronchial hyperreactivity, especially people who have allergic tendency or underlying asthma. They are likely to have prolonged dry cough. ऐसे करते रहते हैं, and they say we are unable to talk. And of course, this has remedy, unlike fatigue. We can treat it, but this is also one of the common symptoms. But what is the dreadful sequelae of COVID is pulmonary fibrosis. That is, the lung gets scarred, and this is dreadful because person continues to be on oxygen, person continues to be breathless. Even if he goes to the washroom, his saturation drops to 80%. Even when he talks, you can make out that he is unable to speak a sentence without breaking a breath. Now, this is pulmonary fibrosis is not new. It can occur after any injury. It occurs after tuberculosis. It occurs after other pneumonia. But since COVID is basically pneumonia, it happens in less than 5% of cases, and we do not have a specific remedy for it. Only remedy is that you treat it effectively. Probably corticosteroids have some effect. There are anti-fibrotic drugs which we use, but about which the evidence is, and that cannot be part of this discussion. Besides this, there are neurological complications, which are, in the beginning of it, I was asked to write an editorial on neurology. So, tingling sensation in the legs in the form of neuropathy. Strokes can occur because basically you must be knowing clotting. Basically, COVID is a disorder where there's a lot of clotting. So if the clotting occurs in the brain, there could be strokes, and this is the complication of COVID. Besides that, heart attacks are common. And for that, as we can talk about exercise later, people have dropped dead after recovering from mild COVID, and they went for a run, and they thought that we let us prove ourselves that I am fine, and then they just had a heart attack probably, and they dropped dead. So these are some of the complications. I can go on for a very long time, but I think I'll stop here. If there are any specific questions, I would answer.
About the
Thank you.
pets, sir. About the pets.
There's no scientific evidence that pets are affected by corona. I think they are immune somehow. Besides this, I don't have any knowledge. If Neeraj can throw some light.
Yeah, there was an article a few days back.
They
about
can at
Like-
best, they can act as the fomites. Sorry.
So Neeraj,
They can
can
act
you?
as the fomites for it.
Yeah. Can you also, since a lot of people who've tuned in are young, can you emphasize further about how many weeks should one not do any, great physical exercise and all of that, and why people are falling dead? Is it because arteries get blocked, or is it because there is some change in the rhythm, or there is inflammation even of the heart as a part of this? Can you, because these are a lot of youngsters, all of them want to be on the treadmill. The day after, you tell them you're fine now.
So I agree. I think Dr. Khilnani has really listed all the important sequelae that we are seeing very often. This particular point is important. We saw it last year also, in fact. Last year also, the coronavirus affected some individuals in that it can cause inflammation of the heart muscle. The tendency to clot is very important to understand. You may recover from COVID, but the tendency to form clots can still remain for a few weeks. Now, people who have recovered from moderate disease, let's say, and in 3 weeks the person is feeling normal, there's no fever, this person decides to go for a run or starts playing an active sport, not realizing that your blood vessels may still be inflamed, your clotting tendency may still be there, or your heart muscle may have been affected without your knowing it, because you were resting and there was no serious disease. And these are the people who can suddenly have a disastrous event and collapse. And the reasons for collapse can be a pulmonary embolism, can be a myocardial failure, can be a cerebral event also. It can be a cerebral stroke also. So it's very important to understand, whatever our knowledge is, that for 6 weeks following recovery, and this is, I've been telling all the people who are, especially youngsters like her said, for 6 weeks, do not do anything more than just normal walking. I know it may sound, too conservative, or maybe someone is being overcautious, but it's your life. It's your life at stake. You don't know which person has developed what complication inside the body, which hasn't manifested itself till now. You can go on doing any number of tests, but you may not pick up these things. This is not testing for heart muscle dysfunction, testing for clot formation is not part of routine follow-up. So everyone, as a blanket rule, should avoid exercising for a period of 6 weeks and gradually build their way up by just normal walking and normal activity. And then once you've crossed that 6-week period, the evidence is that all the inflammation in the body has settled. By and large, the post-COVID effects would have settled. And if you have got no residual symptoms, again, be guided by your symptoms. If following recovery from COVID, I get chest discomfort, even though mild, on walking, I should report it to my physician. If I get swelling over the ankles or the calves or the feet, which is not something that I've had before the COVID, I need to bring it to the notice of my physician, whether they want to do an ultrasound Doppler to see if there's a clot there in the veins in the leg, whether they need to do an echo or do some blood test to see if my heart muscle is affected, or some blood test to see whether there is still a tendency to form clots. There are blood tests which you can do to monitor such patients. And if there's any tendency, then some people need to continue anticoagulant therapy unless there's a specific contraindication to blood thinners or anticoagulants. Some people do need to continue anticoagulant therapy for a few weeks sometimes, even after recovery from COVID.
No, thanks a lot for that. While we are on with you, Dr. Jain, one of the questions was, does treatment for TB, while you get TB, does it aggravate COVID? I know comorbidity is a separate subject which we'll deal with in a separate session, but with TB specifically, since there is a question on that.
So if somebody has a normally healthy person gets tuberculosis, there is no issue. If the person was immunocompromised and thereby got tuberculosis, whether it's HIV infection, whether it's immunosuppressants, or got what we call disseminated TB, which is a form of TB that becomes florid and affects more than one organ system in the body, then there is a chance that the COVID is also like an opportunistic. It is waiting to attack an immune compromised person and cause more severe disease. So that correlation is there, but there is no data to suggest that the normal tuberculosis that is so common in our country is in any way related to COVID, whether COVID it makes it more susceptible to COVID or it makes the COVID more severe. There is no such evidence. The other thing that people have commonly asked, because TB is still such a common infection and lots of people are on anti-tubercular treatment, is when they can take the vaccine for tuberculosis. If they have active TB and they are on treatment, what is the time that they can take the vaccine? Again, if they have taken anti-tubercular treatment for 2 weeks and the active infection is controlled by way of the symptom assessment and how they're feeling, it is safe to take the vaccine. I don't think they should keep waiting till they've completed their TB treatment to take the vaccine.
I know we are running over time, but I'm going to just take the flexibility for 2-3 more general, hopefully short questions. How long does the vaccine protect you for? Assuming you had the second shot, and why do the rules between the two gaps between the first and the second vaccine keep changing? Because is it uncertainty and people are not sure who's changing it, why are they being changed?
No, there's science behind increasing the gap. There may be some need also, but it's not being done just because there may be shortage of vaccine. Point number one, we know till now that definitely for 6 months following vaccination or after COVID infection, you are protected. There is sufficient immunity to protect you against serious disease. Again, against serious disease, against hospitalization, not against infection. So you have to differentiate infection from serious disease. And it is now said also that this may be 8 months, it may even extend to a year. And only, I think, a day ago, there were 2 reports, 2 papers, which say that those who have had infection may, at times, some of them may even have lifelong immunity. But this we will know only over time. It's just been hardly 17 months since this disease has been around.
No.
So 6 months to 8 months, you would have protection. Now, about your question as to why are we increasing the gap? Point number one, the gap for Covaxin, the Bharat Biotech vaccine, hasn't been increased. It is still to be taken after 4 weeks, as was the recommendation in the beginning. Point number two, for Covishield, the one which is made, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine made by Serum Institute, there during the trial stage and now later, they found that if the gap was increased to 12 weeks, you had much better efficacy of the vaccine as compared to when the gap was only 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or 8 weeks. So at 12-week gap, you found had the best efficacy. And also only recently it has been shown that even this first dose of the vaccine provides you a high level of immunity, nearly 50 to 60%. It covers you during the interim 3 months. Of course, you have to be very careful. You have to wear the mask because your maximum immunity will come 2 weeks after the second dose. So there is science behind increasing the gap to 12 weeks. And now, in any case in this country, you cannot get the second jab before 12 weeks. Another question which has been asked, which is that I have COVID and I've recovered. When should I take my
That's right.
vaccination? So here again, the recommendation of the US CDC for many months has been after 90 days of full recovery. So if today I've recovered, I should take my first jab after 90 days. What about those who had one jab and then developed infection? Even for them, the second injection should be given 90 days after full recovery from COVID. So the recommendation is same for vaccination, whether it's your first jab or your second jab, that it should be given 90 days later. And this is something which now, previously in India, it was 4 to 6 weeks. It was very loosely, bound. But now even the Indian government says, take your jab between after 3 to 6 months. So 90 days, I think, is adequate, and you would be following the rules of the country as well.
Last, from the audience side, there are a lot of questions, and we do commit to get back to each one of you with answers. And if they are very, very specific, I mean, this is not intended to be a medical advice session for those who got the disease, but you can reach out to individual doctors. But one is an interesting one, and especially for corporate world, I guess, is that the last 1.5 years has been pretty traumatic. One is the fear of getting the disease. The second is having the disease in itself between you, your family members, and in the last 60 odd days, having family members of very close, near and dear ones who have expired, not being able to visit them, living cooped up in our houses for 6-8 weeks now, it is creating some kind of a mental stress. So which is, equivalent to, I guess, and straining people out completely. And there are a lot of questions on that. Do you, each one of you, recommend that people talk to a psychologist, or it's just a passing phase? It goes away like we normally have stress whenever, in our normal lives. Start with you, Dr. Chen. You're on mute.
Let me just say that it is a real situation. The mental stress, depression, and anxiety incidence has gone up, and it is real. You cannot brush it away and say, oh, it is a sign of a weak personality, or you should not you should not go through this. Trust me, what you just said, Sudhir, to see someone suffer in the family, or to have a loss in the family or friends, is something that only that person knows. And then your own anxieties start playing up. You see, you hear of somebody dying, and then if you say, oh, what happens to me if I get the infection? And then your own anxieties start coming into play. What I think should happen is that people should stop. I know, Harsh is there on television, Dr. Khilnani is there on television, but I think everyone needs to take a break every day from COVID and do things at home that are normal things. Use this time to reassure yourself, spend time with your family, do something that is relaxing. Please switch off from your phones, your television, and all the COVID discussions, because you're getting a lot of misinformation and it's always adding on. You see, our minds are constantly thinking about COVID and the morbidity and the mortality all the time. We have to switch off every day for a little while, and then get your information from authentic sources. Everyone should know it is still a disease where if you start isolating yourself early, you diagnose yourself early, the chances are that you will get better without any issues. Let's not forget that. Most people, the large majority, will recover without complications. It is still not a lethal disease if you take care. So if you have diabetes, please control your diabetes well. Focus on that rather than worrying about what will happen to you. If you have lung disease, make sure you're taking all your medicines. that you've been advised to, control your heart disease, and take care of your general health and nutrition so that your own immune system stays up.
Dr. Kilnani, also the question related to sleep disorder. People are not able to go to sleep. You are an expert in that. Now, this is not that you've had
I
COVID,
thought that-
not a post-COVID issue,
No,
but
no. I'll answer that question. Neeraj has very nicely described, and I just added that physical activity is very important, and which has taken a beating because I know people have gained weight, overeating, and not going out. It doesn't mean that you can't do physical activity. You can do physical activity at home also. Nobody stops you from going to the open garden and walking or whatever is a normal this thing. So that is one thing. And of course, one has to realize from reactive depression and pathological depression, there have been cases of divorce, there have been cases of suicides during this time. So the pathological depression has to be recognized. I have been asked a specific question on sleep disorder. So I will answer that question. If today 12 o'clock I send a message to 10 people asking a question, 8 of them respond immediately. That means 8 out of 10 people are awake at 12 o'clock. And prior to COVID, by 11 o'clock, you stop calling people, सो गया होगा बेचारा जो ना भी ये तो सो जाता है इसको मत उठाओ. लेकिन today you see everybody is awake because morning we don't have to go to office. Everybody has work from home. You can start working from home 5 minutes after waking up. So there is no routine. So therefore, the sleep has taken beating and late nights are very important. So I'll tell you what I advise to people who have got insomnia or difficulty in sleeping. And there are certain things, these are not my own thought process. First and foremost important is that there should be some amount of exercise in life, which should be there. Number two, after 5 o'clock, and one thing before I go, I would also like to say that people do take a lot of alcohol just because they don't have anything to do, thinking that it will elate them. Alcohol basically is a CNS depressant. This should be realized. And it depresses the depressing center, so sometimes euphoria is also there. Ultimately, it adds to the depression. So nobody should think that alcohol can cure your psychological woes. It cannot. So that should be well understood. So as far as the sleep is concerned, physical activity, after 5 o'clock in the evening, refrain from taking caffeinated drink, which could be coffee or tea. Refrain from. It's not that you cannot take, you can take. The third thing is that do not sleep during daytime, come what may. And if you want to sleep, just sleep on a couch or a chair. If you go to bed in the afternoon and sleep for 3 hours and complain that you are unable to sleep, you are not able to sleep in the night, no one can help you. That's one thing. Then in the evening, everybody should have his set sleeping time and waking time. The body clock sets in. ईश्वर ने दिमाग हमारा ऐसे बनाया. मेरा if my time is sleeping from 11 to 6 or 11 to 7 or whatever, that is the usual time. If I try to sleep at 9 o'clock, I won't be able to sleep. Or sometimes we all know that if the sleeping time goes off, 11 की जगह 1 बज गया तो फिर नींद नहीं आती. This is because the human body is like this. So whatever your sleeping time is, it should be approximately fixed. Other thing is that you should finish your dinner 2-3 hours, at least 2 hours, preferably 3 hours before your sleeping time. Dinner should not be very heavy and greasy, and then you can decide to have a glass of milk or fruits just before going to bed. That will help. And lastly, if you have difficulty in sleeping, then just go for a hot shower just before going to sleep. And you will see that you will sleep very well. Other thing, no screen to be seen, preferably 1 hour before your bedtime. It could be a mobile or laptop. And so don't see any screen 1 hour before your sleeping time. Read a book which interests you. Don't read any fiction or horrifying book, just a simple book if you read. Now, going step ahead, suppose you are not able to sleep for half an hour. और ये मत सोचो कि अरे मैं लेट गया, नींद नहीं आ रही, नींद नहीं आ रही, नींद नहीं आ रही. इट बिकम्स अ विशियस सर्कल. नींद कहीं नहीं जाएगी, नींद आएगी. अगर आपने ये सब फॉलो किया है, नींद आएगी. बट फॉर द इफ यू आर नॉट एबल टू स्लीप फॉर हाफ एन आवर, डू नॉट वेक अप टू सी कि मेरे को क्या मैसेज आया, तो उसको जवाब देना शुरू कर दिया. गेट अप, यू कैन टेक अ स्ट्रोल, अगेन स्टार्ट रीडिंग अ बुक. नींद आपकी कहीं नहीं जाएगी, आएगी. लेकिन अगर आपने उठ के लैपटॉप और उसको जवाब देना शुरू कर दिया, दिमाग को चलाना शुरू कर दिया, तो पक्का मान के चलो कि यू विल हैव क्रॉनिक स्लीप डिस्टर्बेंस. Books are your best friends for sleep. If you are unable to sleep, doesn't matter. 1 hour you read something and you will be able to go to sleep. So if you follow this up, I can vouch for it that there will be no sleep disturbance. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very, very useful. I think which you can put into practice every day. I know we are pushing for time, but there is this talk of this third wave. So 1 minute each or more from each one. What can I do as a individual, a citizen of this country to prevent the third wave? I think each one of us need to contribute in some way. So, a very selfish, self-centered contribution to this country. What is it that I do?
I think what you can do is learn from what's happened. Don't make the same mistakes. The second wave hit us very hard. Maybe it shouldn't have been that hard had we been a little more careful. So please understand that you cannot know when the third wave will come or whether there'll be another wave after that. Dr. Khilnani already said that we still don't know enough about the virus and what it's going to do. Assume that it's going to come. There is no harm in assuming that you'll be hit again. And then make sure that for the next few weeks or maybe 3 months or 6 months, you still stick to the same principles. Wear a mask. Do not go out in crowded places unless it's absolutely necessary. We should change our social behavior. We should not, for example, if I'm standing in a group of unknown people and I talk loudly, even through my mask, talking loudly will spread infection. Learn to keep your distance, learn to maintain your, take the precautions that we've been taught all along. Don't throw them away. Don't become reckless again. If each one of us does it, then we can expect, a response from the others also. If I don't do it, I should not expect any response from people that I know. So follow the same precautions. Please make sure that you take your vaccination. It is the most important thing you can do. Focus on getting vaccinated. I know it's not in our hands. I may want to get vaccinated. The vaccines will come. Whenever they come, do not be choosy. I, for one, feel that whatever vaccine you're getting, whatever is available in this country, please take it. Don't wait for something that may come 3 months later. Yes, when it comes, there'll be plenty of people who will get vaccinated with that also. That is our only protection right now.
No, thank you, Dr. Khilnani, Dr. Mahajan, to add to this.
Yeah, Dr. Khilnani, please. I think we've had a master class from him.
Question.
I know. I missed part. I've been privy to it.
मेरा विचार थोड़ा भिन्न है. मैं भिन्न इसलिए है कि we have a habit of blaming others.
Yes.
People don't do this, people don't do that. Who is blaming? Who is blaming? Look at anybody who has behaved properly. And I don't want to name anybody. 1.5 years, if I go to Yusuf Sarai, which is because I worked in him for 30 years, and I go to a store to buy things, if I want to practice social distancing, सुबह से शाम हो जाएगी, मैं सामान नहीं खरीद सकता वहाँ. That is India. Overcrowding is there. Is anybody using mask in the end of agitation or in whatever is going on in this country? We start blaming people. It is impossible to make people use masks. And we have had outbreaks in the hospitals. Outbreaks have occurred after colleagues, all of us sat down and had khana together, tea together, कि चलो अब अब ठीक हो गया सब कुछ. Previous year we were talking about WHO said testing, and today I say
think we have
I think we are losing Dr. Khilnani. Probably what he said was mask, mask, mask.
mask.
And I think what he said is very important, that let's not depend on others. Let's not depend on the government.
Yes.
And let's hope, the government, whether state, whether central, whether our district, that they will do everything. See, there is no better cure than prevention. Prevention of the infection is 100% cure. And that is in our hands. If we follow COVID appropriate behavior, then there is very little chance that we will get the infection. And the example is there in front of you. There are so many doctors, nurses, healthcare workers who have worked in COVID ICUs, in COVID wards for over 15, 16 months. And because they followed COVID appropriate behavior, wore the mask properly, washed their hands when necessary and all of that, they haven't got infected, even where there is so much of virus present. So I think at least for the next few weeks, if not months, it's time for us to self-lockdown, to take care of ourselves, to prevent ourselves from getting infected. And for that, the mask and double mask is the most important thing. In our country today, you can even buy a N95 mask, which is genuine, accredited for nearly 25, 30 rupees. And last year, we used to say that N95 is not for the general public because there was a huge shortage of masks. Today, India has become the provider of PPE and masks to the world. And that's why what we could not buy for 500 rupees last year, today you can get for 25, 30 rupees. So when you go into a crowded place, and if you wear an N95 mask, and actually within the hospital over the N95, we wear a surgical mask and we are protected. So if we can have self-control, then that probably is the best way to see that the third wave, when it comes, and it will come, it's not that we can avoid it, it will come. But instead of a wave, let's reduce it to a ripple. And if that is done, then we will not have this mayhem that we've seen in the last 2 months. We will not have our friends and family die. We will not, even as doctors, have to wait outside hospitals because there's no bed available. And I can tell you, as healthcare professionals working in the field, we were absolutely helpless. We could not help our own kith and kin. And, it was devastating for most doctors to not be able to help. Lines of people outside, oxygen levels falling down, and we are not able to help. So the only way to generate hope and to take care of ourselves and our families and our friends and society at large is to take our own behavior into account, to take control of our own responsibility to ourselves, our families, and the nation as a whole. And it's very simple: mask, hand hygiene, and you're done. Because airborne or not, 2 meters or 10 meters, mutants, new or old, they are all stopped by the mask. So it's a simple thing. If we can follow, I'm sure we'll be at the end of 6 months, 6 months from now, we can again have this webinar, and maybe at that time, share a drink over Zoom and all feel happy that we conquered it. But remember, If we are irresponsible, then we may even end up having something worse in store for us. So it's dependent on us. That's my feeling. The government will do its job. The state or whatever will do its job, but we also must do it. The responsibility is equally ours, if not more so, because I will ultimately, as an individual, be the sufferer.
No, Dr. Manan, thank you. I think that's really, all three of you put it, that it's not really asking for too much. Just mask and better hygiene, right? So I'm sure all of us will, practice that. And before I do close, which we really need to, and let you get back to your patients, big salute to the entire medical fraternity. They've been out there, just developing the vaccine to being working 20 hours days for months now. I mean, genuinely, I think the whole country, the whole world is extremely grateful, for your efforts. And, but Dr. Mahajan, Dr. Jain, Dr. Khilnani, not just for your time today, but your unflinching, a big thank you for your unflinching effort in the fight against the virus. The participation was higher than what we thought. There are a lot of questions that are unanswered, but we will certainly keep in touch with those who have registered and get back to you. And but do post us any questions that come. Our website is very much there. You've registered on that. You can continue to add questions. And this is really a pro bono effort of Meradoc, which is intended to be a complete telehealth platform, but today focused only on this. So once again, thank you very much. Gayatri, I'm sorry. Any last words from your side? Any follow-up that is required?
First of all, thank you for this session. I've already got a lot of messages from employees saying what a fantastic session this was, and thanking Sudhir, you for helping us reach out to all the panelists today. Yes, there are a lot of questions, so maybe you and I can pick it up offline on how to really get back to the participants about that. But really, thank you all of you on the panel today. Thank you so much for joining in.
And sorry for the glitch, and thanks to my colleague Ishan, Shashwat, Prashant for keeping it going while my system had crashed, and look forward to remaining in touch. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.